Thanks for downloading a 3CR podcast. 3CR is an independent community radio station based in Melbourne, Australia. We need your financial support to keep going. Go to www.3cr.org.au for more information and to donate online. Now stay tuned for your 3CR podcast.
But you also had people that were very fine people. Very fine people on both sides.
And the aliens would mind meld and give them the technology. They're bad aliens. So are you surprised the Nazis were influenced by demons?
No, if demons are real, I would definitely think they'd be on the side of the Nazis.
Yeah.
McDonald's is connected to the Clintons. They chop up the bodies and put them into the sausage and hamburgers. People are being cannibalized. Look it up.
And I'm watching CNN talk about this as violent white nationalist protests. We have done everything in our power to keep this peaceful, you know?
It's Pepe's become kind of a symbol.
Welcome to Pasaran, a show about fascism and its gravediggers. I'm Cam Smith.
I'm Andy Fleming.
And this week we are joined by Michael Colborne from Bellingcat's monitoring project. Thanks for joining us, Michael.
Oh, thanks for having me again, gentlemen.
I guess just to begin with, it's been a little while since we last talked. There's been quite a bit going on.
Yeah, maybe.
Where to begin? I guess we want to talk about active clubs a little bit. So perhaps for our listeners who aren't aware, could you tell them what is an active club?
So this whole active club phenomenon, I know probably it's been talked about in Australia. We can talk about Australia a bit later. I'm sure I know there's plenty to discuss there. But this whole active club concept, if people aren't familiar with it, what it is essentially a decentralized network of what really come across like far-right fight clubs, but they've essentially just adopted or even stolen the aesthetics of Central Eastern European football hooliganism. It's essentially what the active clubs are is a model of far-right neo-Nazi quote-unquote activism that's meant to appeal to more younger men, and frankly, younger men who I think would be coded as more quote-unquote working class men. I think that's something that's lost or not really talked about in a lot of the discussions of active clubs. They were founded by Robert Rondeau, an American neo-Nazi who was inspired by what he saw in Central and Eastern Europe in terms of like organizing combat sports events, a football hooligan or football ultra aesthetic. And just took the simplest elements of that model, spread it around. And so now a few years later, this whole active club model has popped up around the world and certainly down there in Australia. So,
Michael, fight clubs of one sort or another have been a feature of the far right for some time.
Yeah.
How do you distinguish active clubs from previous such episodes?
I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, clearly the far right has been anything that could use the label fight club or that's involved in or interested in combat sports, physical fitness. I mean, that's old news. But what from my time over these last few years, watching this whole active club network come to life, like watching it quite literally right from the start in about 2020, 2021, what makes this movement, I guess, explicitly different from previous neo-Nazi and far-right uses of combat sports and whatnot. I think what makes the active club model explicitly different is that it's explicitly organized around, well, the internet, around Telegram, and organized explicitly to be transnational. It's much more explicitly designed to be like a transnational network, and I think we all, those of us who've paid attention to what the active clubs over the last few years, it's very clear that there's much, much, much more of an explicit international networking component behind active clubs than maybe what you've seen on like a country by country level in the past. And I think a second thing that I see really separating the whole active club model in principle from sorts of things other far-right groups have done in the past, even the recent past, is really the much more explicit and very narrow focus on hyper-masculinity, especially on fashion. And I think in continental Europe, the idea of far-right fashion or aesthetics on the far right is, let's just say, a little more developed than it is maybe in Canada, US, Australia. And I think the active club model, based on Rondo building the active club model, or based on very simple things that he'd seen in Central and Eastern Europe. He saw the power, I think, that a unified or almost simple aesthetic and a simple idea, like he saw how useful it could be to bring even a small group of young men together. So I think that in general is what makes it different. Those 2 points, I think, makes it different from for most other, I guess, past far-right uses of combat sports and all that jazz.
Michael, you mentioned there's a working class aesthetic, but are all of the people who are necessarily getting involved derived from working class communities? It sometimes seems that there's a few people who are doing a little bit of play acting.
Oh yeah, there's definitely some that are. I think I had to when I'm thinking about a phrase like quote unquote working class or anything like that to describe active clubs or that whole movement or even that part of the far right, I feel like I have to use that TikTok. What I now learned has become a TikTok cliche of saying something is X or Y coded. So maybe it's more that active clubs are almost, I wouldn't even say designed to be, well, maybe they are, like working class coded, if I can sound that pretentious, because the way that I think active clubs are, the way that they're promoted, the way that the messaging behind them, it really does seem to be targeted towards, let's just say, younger men who aren't exactly as interested in more intellectual things. But of course, that's not entirely the case. Going right back to the Rise Above movement in California, which Rondo founded in 2016, and then of course participated in political violence in 2017 that got him in legal trouble. The active clubs are in one way in not an expansion, but like the original active club, I guess, was the Rise Above movement. And even in some of the initial people in that Rise Above movement, like, yes, there were several people like Rondo himself who maybe you could describe as being sort of more working class, or at least they would certainly see themselves that way. I think I've heard some of them talk like that as well. But there were individuals within the Rise Above movement who were university grads presumably from pretty normal or nice environments. I mean normal in the maybe not the nicest possible way, but I think what your question's making me think about is a lot of the way I think that discussion around some of these far right neo-Nazi groups and individuals, the way that I see a lot of, or almost informal discussion being framed sometimes, is this idea of, these kinds of young men who join these groups, they're troubled. They might come from a broken home. They might come or a single parent family, or have some other issues and other life circumstances. And then, they get pulled into this lifestyle. And sure, that thing I'm sure does happen. But I mean, when you look at some of the other, doing more research in active clubs, and you come across names you learn about, even if they're not people who I put in articles or who I tell the world about, seeing where some of these people who are involved, not just in active clubs, but in any of these far right movements, and you see some of them, you see the privileged backgrounds that some of them come from, and you just have to laugh at it. I mean, one example from an article I think I wrote just over a year ago, I'm based here in the Netherlands, and I wrote an investigation of one of the small far right groups here that, at least at the time, had at least one foot in the active club network. And I was able to identify one of the de facto leaders of this little group because of the boat that his dad gave him, that he was sailing around these Dutch canals and in other places. I mean, we're not talking like a yacht or anything here, but I grew up relatively comfortably, but my dad didn't give me a boat for me and my far-right friends to go sailing around on and didn't leave enough digital clues out there for me to find out. So I use that as the obvious examples. Like, yeah, sure, there are individuals who get involved in these kinds of movements who might come from what I think people would, like a background that people might stereotypically, ascribe to, like Rundo himself. Like I'm not trashing him. I think he's talked about this. Like, he grew up in New York, a single parent household, a single mother, falling into gang life, blah, 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 blah. But we think I think a lot of times we think that story is the story of all these dudes, and it's not. A lot of these guys, they have not, it's almost like we assume that the motivations that people have, that young men have for getting involved in the far right, is because they're missing something, or because there was something missing when they were growing up. We almost pathologize it. But I think, especially now in 2025, I think what's becoming much more central motivator for a lot of these kinds of far right guys, neo-Nazi guys, to becoming men is their motivation is I think it's so much more immature and childlike. It really is, because they've spent their entire lives online and they really feel like, as privileged young white men, that they're being victimized, or just out of the simple desire to cause a little bit of a destruction or to be a troll, and just growing from that.
Maybe they're just missing another dry martini.
Yeah. But I mean, I wanted to tell the story of a boat fellow because people laugh at that, and they should. So,
undone by boatsec is one way to be undone.
Boatsec, yeah, especially in a country with a lot of boats. I think he knows now, but yeah.
Michael, how do you, again, this is a question about distinctions, distinguish between this phenomena, as you suggested in the case of some young men who are attracted to it, as being pathological, in other words, aberrant, and to what extent do you think it represents a shift in broader public opinion, an ideological shift that's seemingly becoming more evident in various election results we've seen in Europe and elsewhere in recent years?
I unfortunately see it as more and more a sign of normalizing opinions or parts of opinions in a lot of countries among a lot of different demographics in different countries. Like I'm struck by, I think I first came across some of these statistics last year, and just yesterday I happened to see some other post reminding me of it. One of the things that really strikes me is the young. So how do I describe it? Like an attitudinal gender gap. I'm describing it poorly right now, but the fact that there's considerable research across different countries, different European countries, even the United States, South Korea as well, where you really see these diverging political and social opinions between younger men and younger women. I mean, I'm not saying this is universal. It's not even universal across those demographics. But the fact that I'm referring to a stat that I think I saw yesterday in regards to the German elections, where it's been pointed out, including pointed out by people like me, how many younger men, 18 to 24, 18 to 29, whatever statistic, that there's like 25% who or more who voted for or said that they would vote for the AfD, for the Alternative for Germany, and probably did. And somebody pointed out yesterday, I saw this. My yesterday, whenever you air it, when somebody pointed out, like, okay, this is true. That there is this gender gap. That younger men are much more, at least in this German context and some other contexts too, more likely to support far right parties. And this commentator pointed out the flip side is looking at Die Linke, the left in Germany, which I think actually did scrape its way into Parliament, into the Bundestag, pointed out that like more than 30% of young women between the same ages supported the left, supported Die Linke. So I do worry that in a lot of across most of our societies, that this gender divide between a lot of younger men and a lot of younger women, that it's just going to keep intensifying. I think thanks to the whole horrible ecosystem we all have of right-wing to far-right conspiracist media. I mean, anything on Rumble, the Andrew Tates of the world, the entire life that Elon Musk has decided to live now and where he gets all his information from. I think there's just going to be increasingly younger boys and men who are going to just increasingly be inculcated and almost propagandized in these online environments in a way that a lot of their younger female classmates, friends, whoever, they're not growing up necessarily being exposed in the same way to the same media, the same information. And I mean, I just seeing that stark gender divide across several different countries, and then including in a place like South Korea, which was, doesn't quite fit the mold of talking about gender issues in Germany, the United States, or places like that. But I really do worry that a lot of our societies, a lot of our political scenes, that this, I mean, frankly, it's been being eroded for a while. I mean, this is not a mystery, but I feel that in a lot of countries' political context, this bulwark, or for lack of a better word, that we want to have against the far right, like the far right, or far right ideologies, like talking mainstreaming of the Great Replacement, conspiracy theories, nonsense, mainstreaming of specific far right actors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I worry that again, whatever metaphor we want to use, whether it's a line that keeps getting crossed or pushed, or that bulwark is weakening. I mean, it's weakening because people wanting to jump up from their chair and collaborate with the far right once they get a little bit too powerful. So I think it's going to differ by country, but I mean, I'm really paying attention this year, even on a very short-term level, to see how quickly some things, even what might seem like relatively minor things, I'm paying attention to how quickly some things start to become mainstreamed. And by things, I mean like symbols, gestures, whatnot, that were even a few months ago beyond the pale, but you can probably tell it's pretty obvious what I'm alluding to. I'm alluding to Roman salute / Hitler salute / controversial salutes. I think my opinion on these is clear, where you have Elon Musk doing his little salute, and then a few other people I saw in the United States did it, and then of course Steve Bannon did it. I mean, I'm really expecting in a few months where we're going to have, even if they're going to claim it's ironic, which we've heard before, there's going to be more and more mainstreaming of people just giving fascist salutes now, because it's been done, that norm. I mean, I think the amount of people when Elon Musk at the inauguration gave his extremely enthusiastic salute, the amount of commentators who were just trying to pretend it was something else, or saying that we've heard all the stupid reasons, but I do worry that things that even like last year we thought, well, Hitler salutes aren't going to become more mainstream. Like we're really getting to a point where they are going to be a little bit. So we need to. I worry because these, what I thought were like pretty obvious norms, are being eroded by people whose brains have been completely rotted by the internet.
Well, speaking of brain rot and the richest man in the world, I did see one chart which I think showed that following his intervention, his declared support for the AfD, its vote rose. So his endorsement did actually make some difference to the vote.
I think it probably did make a difference. I'm sure there'll be election studies and whatnot that can quantify whether they're actually in that sense, but it would appear that way. But at the very least, what Elon Musk's using what's now his platform as a personal platform to boost some of the most odious voices around, I think, of course, it's going to have some level of impact. And I think less even than maybe the impact on the vote. I would think that part of what Elon's intervention has done has helped, even in some small ways right now, has helped or is starting to help with the further normalization of the AfD and the far right in Germany and in German discourse. I mean, the fact that from December Die Welt, the Axel Springer newspaper, gave Elon Musk space for an op-ed that was, well, one, when I first read it seemed pretty ridiculous, and then rumors that it was probably authored with AI, when then it's like, okay, well, now it makes sense. But giving somebody like Elon a platform, and then for him to be discussed in ample spaces in German media, to like, oh, is Germany's war guilt getting too much, or like that his presence is, or that his injection into the debate is starting to erode some of the norms in German society, of all societies, against the far right and neo-Nazis. And I think it's especially worrisome in the German context, because maybe it doesn't get as much attention outside Germany. I mean, I might want to try to help that, but the far right and neo-Nazi scenes in Germany are, let's just say, they're pretty robust. They're always this is not surprising, those neo-fascist, neo-Nazi scenes, whether it's those scenes that have been linked to football hooliganism or to combat sports, which is obviously linked to things in other countries as well, and links allegedly to criminal groups or petty crime, or relatively petty crime. There is just so much in Germany. A lot of it happens on local levels, but they network across east and west of the country. I think there were some statistics that came out probably a few weeks ago. I was looking at them again recently, and there are, it must be like 500 or 600 far right extremists or neo-Nazis who there are warrants out for their arrest in Germany because of their activity. So it's like 500 to 600 far right folks / neo-Nazis who have warrants out for their arrests. And I know for a fact that some of these more high profile individuals, like they've been, I know I'm not going to name him, but I know there's one right now who's been, evading law enforcement for over a year because they wanted to pick him up on warrants, and he just, no. And he's been charged with like 10 other things in the meantime, but no, he's just a neo-Nazi running around and nobody can happen to find him. And there's like 500 or 600 of these other ones too. And that's not even counting like the more conspiracy theorists. Reichsbürger, like there's 100 or more Reichsbürgers on like their own separate list of, people on the far right or related worlds who have warrants out for their arrest. So there's like 500-600 Nazis, 100 weird conspiracy theorists, maybe Querdenken or whatever. I don't have the stats in front of me right now. A few more of this whole, so there's like almost 1,000. And then you look at the left and there's like 100, 130, 150 that are where there are warrants for their arrest for, various things, probably a lot of things related to property crime. So for anybody who wants to play the false game, the false game of equivalence whenever somebody from the left does something stupid, just like the fact that there's all these kinds of individuals with warrants out for their arrests, including a lot for violent offenses, who are not just running around Germany, but with a visa-free Schengen area, a lot of them are clearly outside of Germany. They're networking with some of with like other hardcore neo-Nazi groups around Europe. It's like, you guys, this is me being a bit cynical here, but I just look at Germany. It's like, you guys can't figure out where these guys are. Like you can't find at least some of these guys on a local level. Like I think I almost found one of them, and like I wasn't trying very hard. So I see this thing in other countries. It's less so here in the Netherlands, but I think in general, just as a final point there, one of the things that I am concerned about, especially with everything going on in the U.S., is seeing seeing what influence future craziness in the U.S. because I am not really, I don't have a lot of positive predictions for the rest of 2025. Let's say that in terms of the U.S. And I am increasingly worried the almost copycat effects or the influence that everything from the United States is going to have on far right scenes all over the world, including way down south there in Australia.
Michael, the active club scene in Australia is very closely tied in with the accelerationist scene. A number of the people were previously involved in groups that were part of the Iron March network. Is that the same with other active clubs that you look at around the world?
I don't think I explicitly knew that about the Australian active club scene, that it is people, you're telling me, which I guess is not surprising, coming out of who had been on Iron March or coming out of those kinds of networks, accelerationist networks or groups. And I have seen that somewhere. I mean, I've seen that in a few places, but one place where I really saw it was Canada, where, hi, I'm from. So opposite ends of the world, very similar countries in some ways. In Canada, I think the Active Club Canada leader or one of the senior folks was arrested in, I think, late 2023, probably, and December, I think. And he and other people in the Active Club Canada network, or at least some of their main people, I think some of the names that were out there, they were also Iron March type people. Some of them were actually involved in Atomwaffen in Canada before it got banned. So I think while the active club model can be talked about and presents itself as some much more, I wouldn't say it doesn't present itself as a much more moderate face. Definitely not in some places, but it presents itself as a more quote unquote normal or normie place relatively, but it's still. I think you see how surface level some of these aesthetics and some of this focus on optics and fashion and symbols are. You really see how much of it can be window dressing for just the same old shit, like the same old kinds of guys that 5 years ago were in some Atomwaffen type thing, and then was like, oh, I'll back off a little bit, and then I'll go join into this active club crew. Like I've seen this in European countries as well, where some of the figures who are involved with some active club scenes in some countries or active club like groups, whether they're called active clubs or not, where they're individuals who a few years ago, there were people with like different kinds of weapons charges, involvement with Iron March or Iron March type forums, or let's just say that hardcore accelerationist end of the far right spectrum. A lot more of them seem to be milling around there. Now, of course, in the active club world, there are those kinds of folks that maybe in some circumstances have joined it. But what's also particularly among many things, something worrisome about the whole active club model is how it's being used by older school neo-Nazi networks to partly rebrand, revitalize themselves, help with recruitment. And those are groups like the Hammerskins Network, which I think has been written about frequently, how connected, especially say in the United States and in other countries it is with the active club network. But I don't think people should forget either that another very old school neo-Nazi networks of Blood and Honor, as well as related Combat 18. I think in some cases, in some countries, Blood and Honor and Combat 18 are the same thing, essentially. It's a little harder to see it immediately, but there are a lot more Blood and Honor, Combat 18 type connections to some of this active club world than I think people have perhaps really realized. And I think that's particularly dangerous when if you've got old school, or maybe they're not that old, but they're at least in an old school group, like these old school Blood and Honor guys. And for listeners, just a reminder, Blood and Honor, the neo-Nazi music network, started in the UK 1980s. I'm not getting into 1980s UK fascism right now. That's not my bag. But in January of this year, the UK Treasury introduced a counter-terror sanctions on Blood and Honor, which is, I think, by the first time in the UK that had happened. That specific policy measure had been used. Blood and Honor has been banned in Germany since 2000, but there's most definitely Blood and Honor people all around there and networking. Banned in Spain, designated a terror group in Canada. I'm forgetting France as well. A few other countries as well, where these neo-Nazi networks, their local chapters, basically been accused of being involved in organized crime or even potentially financing terrorism. Like those are some of the kinds of groups or networks that are linked in with this active club world as well. Not saying that, every active club is going to be a gigantic front now for drug trafficking and like importing terrorist weapons. Like let's not go nuts. But those are, I think, some of those connections are really hard. I think as researchers, journalists, activists, what have you, those are really hard to get at and to make sense of. They're very cloudy. They're opaque. They're not transparent about those connections for a reason. But I would just underscore that's another thing that makes some of these networks dangerous is the other networks that they're also embedded in and are part of that have long histories of violence. So,
Michael, another group of very fine people who've been in the news recently has been the Proud Boys, whose leadership was released from prison just recently with Trump's return to office. I understand that the group was prescribed in Canada and I think also New Zealand. What do you think will be the impact of Trump's return upon the Proud Boys?
Honestly, I do pay a bit less attention to the Proud Boys in terms of like specific details, but I really do worry. This whole podcast has been me introducing a thought with like, I really worry about XYZ. Like, sorry, I'm not giving anybody listening casually a positive message here. Well, I mean, it's a realistic message. I don't want to be negative, but I am concerned in the U.S. that, especially the Proud Boys, even though, yes, they very clearly have their own feuds going on right now. That's what'll happen when your leader announces that he's a federal informant. Shockingly, people aren't always on board with that. But I am worried that people like the Proud Boys or people, especially those who were part of groups that were at January 6th and who Trump has pardoned, include Proud Boys, 3%ers, Oath Keepers, those kinds of maybe more traditional, quote unquote, almost militia type right-wing to far-right groups in the U.S. I just worry that with this complete, and especially with the FBI appointees, when Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, I don't know how to pronounce his name, when guys who are that fanatically right-wing and conspiracist are in charge of the FBI, like it concerns me, one, because very clearly they are not going to be making the far right a priority as if they ever were entirely much of one, at least under the Biden administration, they were at least somewhat, and even before. But yeah, I worry now that with that whether it's the Proud Boys, whether it even is maybe on a local level, something like an active club or whoever, I just worry that they're going to feel in the U.S. on the far right that there's just more and more space being opened up for them, even if just a little bit, more and more opportunity and more realization, maybe in specific circumstances, a realization that like, hey, we can get away with some shit here. We're not going to get in trouble, or we're going to get in very little trouble. And I think that really raises the stakes in terms of future political violence, which I think on some level is unfortunately coming soon to the U.S. So another uplifting message for you all.
It's okay. They're not listening to this show to be cheered up.
There's other things in the world to cheer us up. Talking about fascism usually doesn't, but well, it can, and it can inspire us, but yeah, maybe not.
Well, Michael, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks so much for coming on. If people want to find you, you are on Blue Sky, or people can look up Bellingcat at bellingcat.com. Thanks for joining.
Find me there. Thanks again, gents. That was fun.
Well, Andy, that is our program. Just a reminder, it is subscriber month here on 3CR. If you want to support the station, one way you can do so is by subscribing. Head to 3cr.org.au/subscribe, or call the station during business hours 9419 8377. We'll see you next week.
See you then.
Come down to Camp Anarchy, 8th to the 10th of March 2025, for a chance to connect with community and commune with nature. Join us for workshops and music at the beautiful Camp Eureka site in the Yarra Valley. Bring your ideas for an egalitarian First Nation and worker-centred future free of capitalist oppression. Workshop proposals welcome. Contact info@campanarchy.org. Camp Anarchy is a 3CR supporter.
You ready to make a difference? My name is Nasser Mashni. I host Palestine Remembered each Saturday morning at 9:30am. It's Australia's only dedicated radio show on Palestine. 3CR Community Radio is more than just a station. It's a platform for voices you won't hear anywhere else. And we need you. 3CR is an outlet that gives a voice to the voiceless. For nearly 5 decades, 3CR has amplified the struggles, stories and successes of marginalised and silenced communities. From First Nation voices to workers' rights and grassroots campaigns to global solidarity. This is where justice speaks. When you subscribe to 3CR, you're not just tuning in, you're taking a stand. You're supporting independent media that fights for truth, diversity and equality. 3CR is powered by people like you. No ads, no corporate control, just raw, real radio created by the community for the community. So what are you waiting for? Show your solidarity today. Subscribe to 3CR and help us keep the airways free for voices that matter.